Hi, I'm Yonah Levenson. I am the manager of metadata and taxonomy at HBO. And for everybody that didn't get a prize, I just want you to know that up here I have some brochures and cards. One of the things that I'm working on is a digital asset management certificate program at Rutgers. So there are flyers down here, and there's, I think, enough for everybody. So you won't walk away from the conference empty-handed. So, all right. So I work at HBO. We're now Warner Media. There's still reorgs going on. So as far as I know, I'm HBO, but it could be something else. So these are HBO shows. I don't have any Turner on there. We'll have to, and Warner Brothers will have to fix that for the next conference. Anyway, my team and I work on metadata strategies, and we work on taxonomies and ontologies, and we're all about the terminology. So what that means is that I haven't up to this point really touched any data, but I think a lot about, and we end up developing different kinds of standards for implementation across the entire enterprise. Because basically, once you have a set of metadata terms, you know, the entities, the attributes, and if you implement them from the beginning and just carry them all the way through, you save a lot of money from a development and testing standpoint. So let me go over here. So for today's presentation, I want to talk about language metadata standards. So I've been at HBO about 3 years, but when I first got there were all these meetings going on, and we go and they're going to kick off a new show or something, and they're going to go, well, what languages are we going to, you know, is this show going to be done in, and which system has that information? And I'm listening to all this. I came from a book publishing world, and things were pretty, a little more standardized than they appear to be today in the broadcast and media world. So I'm just keep on thinking about how do I wrangle this stuff and try and get more consistency in the terminology used across the company. So we ended up having, so languages was something I could really sink my teeth into. So what we ended up doing was creating a language metadata table. So I'm the co-chair along with Laura Dawson, who's not here today. She's metadata analyst on my team. And we have working group members from Disney, Discovery, IDER, European Union, HBO obviously, Lionsgate, Mesa Alliance is sponsoring or helping, is supporting this effort, NBC Universal, et cetera. You guys can all read. I'm not going to read everything to you. And let me go through the presentation so this way you can see what this is all about. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to these meetings and somebody says to me, okay, well, we need Spanish. People started dropping by my office and they go, what do you call Latin American Spanish? And I was like, I don't know, that question's never come up in my whole career. So we start looking it up, and somebody else says, well, in System A, we call it LAS. In System B, it's called LATAM-SPAN. In another one, it was SPA-LA. And I was just like, this is crazy, because now the developers have to go on and maintain all these different mapping tables for each of the different standards. And the other thing is that we know that there's a lot of content, as we saw earlier, and I have to thank the, now I'm spacing on which company, who was, Amazon, yes, Amazon's presentation where they go through all the different languages, and that's, you know, we have to deal with that as well. It's whatever the licensing agreement is, et cetera. Also, there's accessibility that needs to be taken into consideration, or the visual descriptive language that has to go along for those who may be visually impaired and they want to know what's going on the scene. Also, in my career, what I've often found is that the system developers just come in and they're supposed to solve the problem. They say, okay, let's call it this, and the customer says, that sounds great, or I want to call it this, and they say, okay, you're the customer, and they don't really know metadata standards. So this evolved into the language metadata table. And what we ended up choosing was IETF BCP 47. So that just rolls off the tongue. Everybody say IETF BCP 47. And I do have another slide that'll explain what each one of these are. But why did we have to go to, it's really a standard of standards. So we know that ISO 639 isn't granular enough sometimes for the needs. And we even saw it again on the Amazon screen where they had Parisian French and they had they had the Latin American Spanish, they had the Castilian, etc. But at times, 639 is too granular because we can't say, there isn't any code in there for Latin America. The other thing we know is that sometimes the visual or the written languages are different than, the codes that are used are different than the audio languages. And I have some examples of those that I'll be providing. So spellings can be different. If I just say English, how do you know if I'm going to spell color C-O-L-O-R or C-O-L-O-U-R, etc. And again, the audio languages could have different, so that's different kinds of dialects. So these are some of the different areas also, this is the fourth bullet, and I think this is really important. When I look through a lot of metadata standards, and as the manager of metadata at HBO, we do a lot of standards research trying to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. Sometimes there's often just one language field. However, we know in broadcast and media, and it doesn't really matter, again, I said I come from the publishing world, it doesn't really, or whatever world you're from, you may now have some kind of a video clip that goes along with your content. There may be an audio clip with pronunciations or definitions in addition to the text, etc. So now we want to make sure that the language codes are identified properly for audio, written or visual languages, and those could be subtitles, closed captions, and again, the audio description is needed for accessibility compliance. Then there's also what user interface, how they're going to present it. I know that, and I was looking for it, and there's a lot going on last week, that even on the HBO Go site, you can find some of the UI does have content in Spanish. I think it's under the Latino section. So the user interface, you may want to indicate what those languages are that it can be displayed in, what's the rights and licensing agreement for, what languages, and again, where am I distributing, what languages is this all approved for? So IETF BCP 47. So IETF BCP 47, again, Internet Engineering Task Force, best common practice, unless it's best current practice, but common, current, it all works. And number 47, as I said, it rolls off the tongue. And you can combine, and this is what it's made up of, ISO 639, 3166 with the country codes, and then here's the piece that helps pull it all together then, are the UN territory standards. So for example, for Spanish, and again, I have some other visual descriptions, ES-419 equals Latin American Spanish. And there can be over 40,000 different combinations. We have chosen not to boil the ocean. We just initially went with the first, all the languages that are in use and licensed at HBO, which is about 128 languages. I thought it would be like a 3-4 month research project because we have other metadata and taxonomy and ontology projects going on in the team. And 16 months later, we came up with our table. It took that much work to pull it all together. But what we're able to do is, again, make sure that we're precise and we can really describe what we need. In addition, IETF BCP 47 is supported by the W3C. So here are some examples. So here's the Spanish example. And so again, we acquire the rights to distribute the content in a lot of languages, and it doesn't matter where those are spoken. But we also know there can be lots of variations. So here's an example of Spanish. So ES is just a simple Spanish, or just basic Spanish, then Castilian, and then Mexican and Latin American. So I believe the movie Roma, which came out recently, the subtitles were done in Castilian, the subtitles, but the movie was shot in Mexico, so the director was not happy with the subtitles that were provided because evidently Mama was translated into Madre. And so now, and who knows, I have no idea, it's not our company's film, but somebody just said, give me Spanish subtitles. Now, if we as an industry can adopt the the language metadata table, now we have provided a table that has the map and says, I want to be very specific, this is the language that I want. We also know that, and this question has come up recently with Spanish, is that sometimes people are working, companies are working with legacy data or older content, and they don't know what kind of Spanish it is. So now, if you like metadata and really geeky discussions, we are a really fun working group. And so now we know that we have to have ES-001 for that unknown Spanish. We don't know if it's Mexican, Latin American, Spain. We know nothing. All we know is that it's Spanish, but we want to indicate we don't know. There's also now a trend, and people from Gracenote and Nielsen have also been contributing and provided some use cases, that there can be Spanish that they consider world Spanish, where the words in the descriptions, for example, and again, Amazon mentioned that earlier, that there was a word that they had switched because it was understood enough by everybody. So that is ES-100 as a world Spanish. So again, we're putting all this information into a single table, so this way everybody can look at it, everybody has access, it's an open standard, and you don't have to spend any time trying to figure out what combination of IETF BCP 47 you should be applying to your content. Chinese, okay, so there's spoken languages, there's a whole bunch of them. We just have two up here as for the example. But in the written languages, there's the Han and the Hans. So there's a simplified Chinese, and then the other one. So yeah, traditional and simplified. So for right now, so again, this all started out as an HBO standard. We have now opened it up. Our committee has been working on this, again, throughout the industry for 10 months already. We're going to have another release of this in July, towards the end of July at a Mesa Alliance conference in New York. But in any event, this allows for whatever kind of combinations that you will need. Here's an example of an HBO show where, again, somebody on my team, she says, oh, they're not speaking Italian, they're speaking Napolitan. I wouldn't know because I don't speak Italian, I don't speak any variations or Napolitan, let alone Napolitan. So this way, we have the codes available in case somebody wanted to enter those in. And again, we don't know what kind of information was sent out to the house that did the subtitles and possibly dubbing in whatever language. Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? But we can now provide the codes. So this is our mission statement, because again, we want to make sure we have a unified source of reference for the language codes throughout the broadcast and media industry. One of the things that I can tell you is that I go to other conferences, and when I talk to people, and I presented on this a few times already, it really almost doesn't matter what industry you're in, because I can think about, here we are sitting in MoMA, and we know that there are artists from many different countries who, from decades of thousands and thousands of years. So if you wanted to indicate that the wording on a picture is the traditional Greek versus modern Greek, you can have all this information available to you. And it's in the table, you just apply it. And what we end up doing is we extend the LMT code values through vetted field definitions and approved language codes with the community. So we have a working group, and if there are people who are interested in the working group, please come see me afterwards. We know that there are people who need to influence what the LMT is going to be versus people who are just going to accept and say, I'll take whatever you give me. So we're going to end up probably with a couple of different mailing lists, distribution lists for those who need to sign off and say, yep, this code is going to work for everything that I do. So we make sure we have use cases, run it through the suggested code or the updated code through the use case to make sure everything works. And then, again, those who you can implement. So it's so big. This is the biggest screen I've ever used for presentation, so it's actually pretty cool. So these are all the different, on this left-hand side here, the column, the column headers, but basically we're working like with an Excel or a Google workbook that we have a template that people can fill out, and then these are all the values here on the left as far as what are the different codes that, or the kinds of information we need to capture, and on the right are the definitions, because we want to make sure it's clear to everybody. And even though we've been working with this standard for almost 2 years now, again, the questions like with the world Spanish versus the unknown Spanish, we thought we knew the pattern, but then we reached out to the IETF points of contact, and they vetted and said, yes, this is what we intended it to be. So this way, then, it just takes all the questions out of it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so here's an example of some populated values. One of the ones that was particularly challenged that actually I'm going to go back here for a minute. You'll see we have the long descriptions, like we have 1 and 2, audio, language, display 1 and 2, visual language, display 1 and 2, et cetera, because of Serbian. So one of the things that we also have to be cognizant of are what's going on politically. In Serbia, again, a place I've never been to, but evidently a sign could be written in Latin as well as Cyrillic, and they have equal weight, perhaps depending on what part of the country you're in. So therefore, we had to be able to allow the two different countries. We also include the audio display, so it's in the endonym, which is how the language is written in the language of the country. And then we have all the codes. Again, we're following the pattern of the IETF BCP 47, and we also include the URNs, so this way that everybody, again, your developers have what they need. The LMT, the language metadata table, is there's a lot of interest in this throughout the industry. Other standards organizations, I'll call it WorldCraft from IDER, who is here. IDER, the Entertainment ID Registry, is going to adopt the LMT once we go through the final vetting process. Movie Labs, same, and there are other standards industries who would also just say we're following the LMT. Right now, okay, so to sum it all up, it gives a lot of flexibility. It's extensible. We just, if there's language on there that you use, feel free to then if you don't have access to the documents, we can send you the template, fill it out, and let's see how it all works. It's, we want you guys to fill out what those changes would be, do a little homework, you're familiar with it, and then we'll do the vetting. There are links in here. If you go to the mesaalliance.org website, then there are links there to several articles and the initial draft, which came out last July, of the language metadata table. I would say if you're interested in this, hold off until we have the next release in July 2019. And again, if you want to participate, that we would be happy to have you. Any questions?
Thank you, Yonah. That was good. I learned something, see, every day. Okay. Guess what? Nick has a question.
Go, Nick.
I have a question. Actually, I have like 10 questions. I'm not going to ask them because I am the kind of geek you referenced earlier.
Okay.
But the biggest one that I have is you guys attacked language metadata. And you went about it in this very, this fantastic way, this very comprehensive way. Oh, this is the table?
This is the table if people need to see it. Anyway, maybe we'll...
And so a question I have is, now that you know how to do this kind of thing and start to define some standards and work with groups, are there any other areas in metadata that your group has thought about and said, well, this could kind of use a standard now, and that you've maybe explored even things like schema.org or whatever, and they come up short? Like, are there whole other next projects in the queue, or are there anything people in this room can take up?
We have had some informal discussions just within the team. We think that there may need to be a little more formalization, possibly with territories. Again, back to the Amazon example of the Parisian French, which, you know, again, Paris as a geographic location, you know, what is the which standard or whatever, the language value, the location, is that gonna, the UN code, is that gonna be sufficient? Because again, 639 doesn't go down to the city level, it's really all about the country. So is there something else that's gonna have to be added in? So territory comes up periodically, and I'd like to be able to finish up the policies and procedures documentation before we go on to the next one. It's been a lot of work, but it's been very rewarding. I mean, I would just be curious, a show of hands, is this something that is of interest to people here in this room? Good number. Okay, good. Good. All right. Any other questions? Does one question spur another?
I see a hand waving way in the back. If one of our assistants with one of the mics could get back there, that's great. Thank you.
Do you have a hierarchy for which language to choose first? Like if the movie is spoken in Castilian Spanish, but the subtitles are in Mexican Spanish?
So what do we...
Like, do you sign one before the other, or is it only what the subtitles are, or what spoken is?
So that's where it gets into the fact that we need multiple fields for languages. So also along those lines, we've reached out to SMPTE and let them know that the LMT exists, because they put language information in the MXF tracks. So that's another place where that information could be automatically pulled from. And then you can have it, whether it's, you know, is it the closed captioning for accessibility purposes or whatever. But I would say that maybe, Nick, maybe that answers your question, is maybe there needs to be an extension of some of these other standards to accommodate an audio language versus a visual. We also had a big discussion with regards to visual of whether that was like closed caption and subtitles versus sign language. And then we decided it was just easier to separate sign language. And we're going along right now with IDER's recommendation. They have 6 languages in the IDER standard. There's 335 in the, I think it's the IANA standard, and we decided 335 was a little overkill now. But again, if somebody has the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th sign language that they want to include, you know, reach out, let us know what it is, and we'll get it vet by the committee. But as long as you have a use case is really what it comes down to. Let's put it in.
Any last questions for Yonah? Oh, we've got one up front here. Oh, I'm the closest, so I'll just take this back from you.
Thank you very much. How many languages did you define in total?
So we started with the HBOs. We went like through our rights system and like every system we had, and we had about 127. And then now Disney has a list of like 50 more that they want to add. Again, they've got older content. There was some even, you know, conversations about different kinds of Chinese that may be used in much older animated films, that it was a broken up Chinese or something. So anyway, that altogether, we probably will have about 160 to 170 at this point.
Great. I think that's it for the questions. Thank you so much, Yonah. I appreciate it.